I have been monitoring the chat this afternoon, but I do have a few questions myself. Preeti, perhaps I could go to you first as you've just finished. I wonder if you could perhaps tell us a little bit more about the relationship between the curricular and the games, please.
Okay, so that's a really helpful question, Vicky. Thank you so much for it. I will just sum it up in one key point. Now, the games helps a child or a young person to really experience, how the situation of gender-based violence can be faced in particular context by young people or children in a very authentic situations, and they navigate that, they become aware of different perspectives, they look at consequences through their choices. So it is a journey that really helps to sensitize a young person and develop their awareness, but it is situated in somebody else's lived experience, though it is very authentic. Now, in terms of the curricula, that is linked to the young people's and children's own environment and their own lived experience. So the resources for learning come from their own context. So you could almost say it is where they can develop their ability to think about how are they going to conduct themselves, or how are they going to make connections to protect themselves or develop their resilience within their own lived context. So it is like building on from that, connected to that, but also creating that space to internalize it within one's own lived experience through a very direct engagement in the learning resources and bringing themselves to that.
Preeti, we've been very fortunate to have you as part of our team. That's absolutely for sure. Thank you so much for that. Tim, I wonder if I could just pose a question to you, please. Of all of the stories that you shared with us from across our countries, was there anything that really surprised you?
I think what surprised me was the links actually between such very different contexts, that in each of those you see threads of the same issue, manifesting in very different ways, of course, because the contexts are hugely different. But this issue of the norms around what is a healthy relationship, what's acceptable. I found it really shocking what people did think was acceptable and had been told was acceptable by peers and people in positions of authority to them. So I was very shocked by that, and I was shocked to see it across the globe. Really, it's hard to pick out one example, but just in the India team's work, so many girls being denied their education in favour of the young boys. I think there were so many examples of that, and we saw that issue across the board, really. Vicky, I don't know if you saw my comment on the chat, by the way. I can't see anyone's chat. Teams is behaving strangely for me, so
that's okay. I haven't seen anyone pose any specific questions for you, Tim. So don't worry. We're doing our very best with the technology here this afternoon. Nick has been an absolute star at keeping us all on track, but it's been a bit challenging. But there were no other specific challenges, Tim, but I would of course welcome anybody to contact him themselves if there was any burning question that you have for him that you might think of after we finish today. But thank you very much, Tim. Really appreciate it. I wonder if I could pose a question to Hayley, please. Hi, Hayley. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really fabulous to see, and I really wish we'd been able to see more of it during our conference program. It was so exciting. My question, Hayley, you've obviously immersed yourself very much in the design, the look, the feel of the game, the stories that we've shared. And I wondered how you've managed the kind of self-care aspect, because obviously it's very sensitive topics that we're dealing with. I wonder if you could tell us anything about how the team supported each other.
We just very much were there for each other. Like everything that I read, because I read all of the transcripts, every single transcript of the interviews, I went through each one, and all the important findings were shared amongst the team. So it was very much like a shared load, so to speak. But I think it was the motivation as well to do a good job and to turn these quite harrowing interviews into something productive and worthwhile, so that we could actually make a difference potentially. So, and personally, a lot of my self-care involved chocolate as well. Got to be honest.
Chocolate's good.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much, Hayley. Craig, I wonder if you could maybe tell us a little bit more maybe about the challenges you may have faced yourself and the team in gathering the audio from across all of the different countries.
So that was an interesting one, and obviously COVID played a huge part in that as well, because ordinarily in the way that the team had previously recorded the UK actors and cast, it was quite nice. You'd have everyone in a studio, you'd have everyone together in one effort, and it's a much more cohesive way to record things. You're able to give live feedback to certain actors, do this more like that, this line with this inflection and so on. As soon as it went remotely, that got a lot harder to control. We did our best to provide the country teams with as much remote guidance as we could in terms of scripts, in terms of line by line direction, almost with this is what this line should sound like. It leads into this, which might sound a bit like that. I've got to say, Uganda and Jamaica and India, that they all did amazingly well with the limited guidance that we were able to give them from a distance. They did such a great job. It was facilitated mostly through regular meetings to ensure we were on track. We had demo recordings. They sent auditions over sometimes of certain actors, and it was a really productive process. It was quite difficult remotely, but ultimately absolutely thrilled with how it came out, and I think it's through sheer effort of the country teams that they managed to get that together. So full credit.
I think team effort absolutely has evidently paid off in the games that you showed us this afternoon. I have a final question, and I would like to pose it to Song, if that's okay.
Can you see me?
I can see you. Nice to see you.
Great.
As our lead for Work Package 3, what challenges have you found in leading a team remotely during these very challenging times that we've been going through? How have you managed to keep everybody together and on track and working together?
I think the key thing is not just remotely. I think it's always been remote, because originally I was based on another buildings and the schools, and the key kind of connection is through the game development managers. In this case, Craig and Helen was before. So I think it's quite, because we're using technology quite a lot. So we're using collaborations that are Skypes, Zooms, and then when we lockdowns, then they're using Teams and the Skypes before the team was everything is operational. So we use a lot. So it's kind of get used to these kind of environments to keep everything going. But I think the biggest challenge actually is not about actually keep everybody together. It's more challenges to keep the expectations in the right level, and especially within the team, because the whole team want to do the best job possible. But my job is make sure the game is delivered, because the game is not just the game, it's also research instruments for the other work packages to deliver trials. So we have to make sure the game is delivered on tracks, on schedule. And so that's the kind of challenge between myself and the teams, is to make sure they want to do the best we can, but sometimes we have to give up something to make sure the game is delivered. So that was a good experience. And at some point our schedule slipped quite a bit, and I was quite worried. But I'm really glad when Craig on board, everything back on track. So that was probably the biggest challenge throughout the process.
Absolutely. And in terms of engaging with the team, Ros has commented as well. Of course, we used members of the team to themselves play a role in providing our voices for our characters. I wonder if maybe Craig could tell us more about that. We had young people involved, didn't we?
Yeah, this is probably more a question for the team. Perhaps not so much me. Hayley, do you have any input on that?
Well, I know we had Christine, I believe, voiced a character in Jamaica, and I believe, I know for a fact Jill voiced the character for the UK, which we were able to get into the game. So very, very, very grateful for both of them and their contributions. And I know the teams in the country spent a lot of time working with the young actors on the ground to make sure that they were very comfortable with the recording, that they understood what was going on, and just it really came through as well. Like, the young people did such an amazing job, like emoting such powerful emotions, really, and like doing it in a genuine way that you can feel through every part of the game. So yeah, very grateful for all they've done.
They absolutely did, Hayley. And in your presentation, you did touch on the fact that the characters that we had for the UK game were quite surprised in the cafe scene, weren't they, with the hand on the back of the neck and pushing them out of the cafe. So it's interesting to see that even just putting the work together has an impact on people that maybe we weren't anticipating it would have that impact on. And again, thinking about the self-care of those people as well, you know, the wider team has obviously been really important. I'm just going to have a look at the chat here. Lots of hearts and thumbs up, and yes, it's all been great, but I just wonder if anyone had any further questions that they would like to put to our presenters this afternoon. Ros is up for the chocolate, Hayley. That sounds good. We all have our vices, don't we?
Gotta be chocolate.
Okay, I've got a question from Graham for you here. What did we miss out of the game because of the time? You mentioned that you changed the UK game slightly, didn't you? Could you tell us more?
Yeah, it's quite common in commercial games. For a bit of background and context here, it's quite common when you're working to a development schedule to have an ideal set of features and requirements, and to have your perhaps more realistic set of features and requirements that quite dynamically changes sometimes. This can change week to week, month to month even. There was originally full motion capture and full sets of reactions to the motion capture, and it was resulting in something like 6,000 individual files, and those would have all had to be mapped up to every single character line by line, and obviously checked and verified and ensured they were all in the right place. The biggest cut in that aspect, in that regard, was probably some of the motion capture. It was instead focused on to make sure we had the highest quality motion capture we could get in place for the key important pivotal points of the game. Because that's where it felt it was most useful and most effective, obviously, in driving the messaging that we wanted to get across. So I think that's probably the biggest that comes to my mind. And obviously, there's tons of smaller features that do get chopped and changed. It's quite common in games. Hayley, do any come to your mind along the way? It's all a bit of a blur in my head at this stage.
There were a couple of scenes that in the long run weren't essential to the story, and it was all about making sure it got down to the trial time as well, because the most important thing was that the players would be able to complete it in the time that they had. So it was all about condensing things down so that they got the same experience that we planned on, but that they could get it in the 40 minutes or so they had allocated. Aside from that, I think I would say that because the UK started first, we were able to take a lot of the lessons we learned from the UK and apply it to the later games. So we experienced like almost none of that, having to like chop and change or remove content or anything like that, because we understood the process and everything a bit more. And again, the country teams did a massive effort in doing all of the audio for the characters on their side of things. So that helped us in a way as well. Yeah, I don't think we actually had to cut all that much out in the end.
And we rightly have Carol commenting just now, to the untrained eye, we didn't notice the details related to the motion capture. The games were brilliant, to use Carol's words. I'm wondering as well, just sticking on the games, whether there are lessons that you've learned from developing these games for the GCRF project, which you're going to take forward to our other project based in Brazil.
If I make a start, I think biggest lesson or biggest we learn from, I think, because from research point of view, the game is very much a development process, and from the very beginning, we didn't really think about the game design as a research from the research process. So it's very much from thinking about from development process. So we know the requirements. We defined kind of the game designs, the genre of the games. That a lot of things actually is being predefined very early on. And so if we do again, I think we will probably taking a bit more research point of view to look at why we do that in the first place. So that will probably provide us as a slightly different perspective. And but although we didn't go through that particular process in the current games, but I'm pretty satisfied that the outcomes we have achieved. And it's a very outstanding job, so I would say, from the game teams. But I think from like Emilio, we are currently doing is that we actually take a slightly different approach to from research point of view to adding the research process as part of the development process. So that will help us quite a significant in terms when the publication side, our research output side, when we actually write a publication, we have a sufficient amount of evidence and to support each of the decision we have made during the process. So that's really from me from the research point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Thank
no,
you.
I think that's a good point. And if I would add to that, it would be on similar lines actually to perhaps engage, as we are with Emilio, the user reference groups and that kind of avenue sooner to ensure that we're getting stuff like platform and genre, and just making sure we're hitting exactly what the target audience of the age range, the demographic, the country in terms of the devices they use and platforms they use, making sure we've got all of that also tied to as much research as we can. It also goes a long way to making sure we actually hit the requirements. Because obviously a key part of this, I think for us is having these games on Windows PCs. Perhaps it's not the most useful in every target country we've been operating in. Perhaps they could have been on lower end devices. But again, if you're not basing that on research at the beginning, it's quite difficult to make that decision. You can't really make it blindly. So I think engaging that earlier in the process with Emilio is going to be really beneficial.
I would say, sorry, just to add on a slight little thing to that as well is the country teams, like working with them super closely again, because we saw with GCRF how much the country teams could add, and we've made sure that from the very beginning, like we're getting in like bi-weekly meetings with Alex and his team, and they have been absolutely amazing so far. I cannot praise them enough for everything they've added, so I'm already confident that we're going to do another great job.
I'm absolutely confident too, Hayley, no question. Adele's just added something as well here with regard to the games. She said, we had originally planned to create films from the games so that they could be shown in schools that didn't have IT facilities. Clearly those plans have been impacted by COVID and other challenges along the way, but do you think it's still worth pursuing this idea in a further grant application? Maybe Song could answer that one.
Well, of course. I mean, any more kind of media outputs and the platforms we can use is always going to be beneficial. I think in terms of the films, we need to really understand what kind of film. Is it just films from the game itself, or we have dedicated specific films for the contents of the games? So I think that need to be, if we just part of the games and how the game is played, then it's relatively straightforward process. But if there will be a dedicated films in line with the game contents, then we need to have a proper budgeted teams and people with the skill set to do that as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Has anyone anything to add to that? No. Have I still got Preeti with me here? Preeti, are you with us? Is anybody there?
Yes, I'm there. So sorry. Yes,
that's okay. That's okay, Preeti. I have a question which has come from Roz. How do we envisage evaluating the curriculum subject to funding? Is that something you could tell us?
Well, I can just share my perspective, and I'm sure other team members will have their perspective on that as well. For me, it is like evaluation and training go hand in hand. So I would like to see how we can take it further, like if we are going forward with other projects, and what we can do to explore how teachers and teacher educators would work with this curricula, and look at what are their capacity development needs, if any, to put this into practice. And then related to that, explore the evaluation of it in terms of the experience of children and young people within the context of engaging with these activities, and also looking at it from the perspective of teacher educators and teachers. Because I think if it is going to be integrated as something that leads to the prevention of gender-based violence and be an anti-violence resource of value, it really needs that sustainability and that integration within teacher education provision. So I would be really interested in, exploring how evaluation and further projects can facilitate that. The other thing that I'm also really interested in knowing in terms of the evaluation side of things is how do we make a connection to what is happening in the local community, in the national level, and also within what we think of as a global society to work on these issues. Because, for example, I think Prachi ma'am, who is a consultant in the India context, she made a very good point during the panel when I was with Ni3 Mumbai group. She said, what will happen when children develop this awareness and this learning through the pro-social games or curricula? What happens when they go home and these attitudes and these, experiences of gender bias are still persisting? What happens if, and one of the principals also shared, she said, what happens if teachers themselves hold these biases in their own, that they have internalized and they've been socialized into? So I think there's a lot to be said in terms of also looking at evaluation in terms of how would we identify shifts in consciousness, shifts in structures of understanding, and those connections with the wider community.
Thank you
so much for your question.
Thank you, Preeti. Yes, it does.